So this problem is called length of last word. It says given a string S consists of upper and lowercase alphabets and empty space characters, return the length of the last word in the string. If the last word does not exist, return 0. Note, a word is defined as a character sequence consisting of non-space characters only. So in this example, you have the input hello world and the output is 5 because the last word is world, which has a length of 5. Let's say it consisted only of empty characters. We just return 0 like it says up here. And since it mentions right here that a word consists of non-empty space characters only, you can have an instance where, let's say, you would have hello world with a couple spaces afterwards. We would have to ignore the couple spaces and only start counting when we get to the world. Alright, so let's start out with the string hello world. It's probably not obvious that there's a space between the comma and the W and a couple of spaces after the D. So let's write it like this instead. The underscore just means a space. So world, 2 underscores. Okay, so how do we solve this? First, we need to create a variable called something like before first non-empty character, and we set that equal to true. So now let's start. The way we iterate over this is from right to left. So right now we are here. Is this an empty character? Yes. So we just move to the next one. All right. So is this an empty character? Yes again. So we just move to the next one. Now we're at the D. Is this an empty character? No. So we're going to change our variable before first non-empty character to false. All right, so now we need to start counting the number of letters until we hit a space. So let's call the variable something like counter. And we're at the first one, so counter equals 1. Then you just keep moving along. Add another one to counter, counter's 2. Move along to here, this will be 3, 4, 5. So at this point, counter is 5. What's the next character? The next character is an empty string. So what do we do now? First, we check if we are still before our first non-empty character, and we're not. So now we just break out of the loop and return the counter, which is 5. So the reason we need to have this before first non-empty character variable at all is, remember at first we were at an empty character. If we just broke out of the loop the first time we hit a non-empty character and the string started with an empty character, we would see the counter would be 0, which is not what we want. We only want to start counting after we've hit our first non-empty character. All right, so let's start with what LeetCode has given us. It's a function called length of last word, and it accepts a parameter s, and s is just a string. So let's start with something to count the number of characters in the word. So let last word length equals 0. Then we need to keep track of whether we are before the first non-empty character. So let before first non-empty car equal true. All right, but what if the string that we were passed is empty? In that case, we'll just return the length of the last word, which at this step would be 0. So if s.length equals 0, just return last word length. All right, now we have to loop over our string, but we have to start from the right and go to the left. So for let I equal s dot length minus 1, so the last character, I is greater than or equal to 0, and then I minus minus. All right, so that would put us here. Now we need to check whether the character we're on is an empty string. So if the character we're on, let's say, doesn't equal an empty string, we do certain things. But since, as we've drawn it out on the left, we are at an empty string, so I'll skip to the else clause and show you what we can do here. So else, since we are on an empty string, we need to check whether we are before the first non-empty character, and we are. So if we're not before the first non-empty character, we would break out of the loop. But since we are before the first non-empty character, what we would do is we would just keep looping. So let's just show you that. So next loop, we'd be here. Is the character we're on an empty string? It is. Are we before the first non-empty character? We are. So we just go to the next loop. Now, is the character we're on an empty string? It's not. So we'd go into this if clause. So if it's not an empty string, we just increment our last word length counter. And we need to flip our before first non-empty character variable to false because we're no longer before our first non-empty character. All right, so next loop we'd be here. We would increment our last word length counter. Next would be here. Increment again. Then we'd be here. Increment again. But now we'd be here. So are we at an empty character? Yes. So now we go into this clause. And are we before our first non-empty character? No, we've already hit a few letters. So if we're at an empty string and we've already hit some letters, what do we need to do? We can now end by breaking out of the loop. So now that we've broken out of the loop and we have a count of the strings, all we have left to do is return the last word length. All right, so let me run it. Okay, submit. All right, so our result was about 75% of other JavaScript submissions. So that ends this video, and as usual, the code and the written description are linked down below. See you next time.